Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book, Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. Two, because I'm a fan of punk music. And three, it's just more fun, right? Anyway, if this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. And please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. Anyway, that's enough from me right now. Let's get into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Monica Joe, who is, curiously and super interestingly, an applied anthropologist in virtual reality, no less, and also had the first virtual reality wedding. Who knew there was such a thing? Anyway, hello, Monica. How are you?
Hi, Adrian. I'm doing well.
Excellent. Well, so thanks for coming on the podcast. And maybe that's a bit of an odd introduction, but put us right on a few things. Tell us a little bit about yourself and you and the work that you do, just to give us a bit of a background.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm so stoked to be on Punk CX. And my current coordinates are I'm in Oakland, Oakland, California. And my pronouns are she, her, and siya, which is a pronoun in Tagalog. And yes, kind of a call center hub of sorts. And just a quick background on siya as a pronoun. There are no gendered pronouns in Tagalog, so everyone is the same. Everyone is the equivalent of they. She and he don't exist in the language.
Super cool.
So I think so too. So if there were an alt text below me as my image for listeners who don't know what I look like, just a quick descriptor. I'm a woman of Asian descent and background, and I am sporting a bob cut, so kind of a short, dark hair with admittedly some sprinkles of gray.
Not as much as I have.
And my work has been in tech startups and media companies that cover the workforce, especially in like contingent labor and all of that, and heavy regulations around that here in the States. And like you alluded to, my academic training is in anthropology. And I'm currently reading a book called Anthrovision, which is by an anthropologist who became a journalist there in the UK, Gillian Tett. I'm a big fan, and I always love to, just keep up with the discipline, so to speak.
And so you work for is it? How do you pronounce it? Mersion? There you go. I was going to say Mersion, but Mersion. So
Mersion, like immersion. Yeah. So just after lockdown happened last year, I joined Mersion, so I'm kind of a pandemic hire. And it is a company that has developed a solution to help improve human interaction. Its origin story is in the teacher preparation space. And so, they honed in on how to use the technology to help improve people's skills. So it's a blend of mixed reality, artificial intelligence, and human intelligence. So the aim is to help organizations improve how they interact with colleagues and also their customers, and how to just improve people's skills in general by practicing communication skills. And also, I've been in the VR industry since, before Oculus. And I really see what Mergen is doing as a way to prove and live out the claim that VR can be an empathy machine.
I like it. And because that's what we wanted to talk about. But before we get into that, I've been asking on these podcast chats for the last kind of little while is, how are you? I mean, you were a pandemic hire. How's that been? How's the kind of last 15, 16 months going to been for you? I mean, the world's changed.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm happy to say that all things considered, I'm not doing, poorly or badly. I just came off of a day off on Friday. So the company gave us 3 additional paid rest and recharge days for the month of July. And they have been invaluable. People are burnt out. People are sometimes described as languishing and just really kind of at their wits' end in general. So the rest and recharge days, the summer Fridays, have been really great. And speaking of immersion, I booked myself a session in an immersion tank, the sensory deprivation. Yeah. I've never done it before. And so for the last recharge and rest and recharge Friday, that's what I'm going to be doing.
Nice. Now, you mentioned empathy and you mentioned the work that Mergen is doing. And the thing that sort of triggered my interest in this sort of a conversation, the preamble, as it were, to set this up, is that Mergen recently published a new report called The Human Edge in an AI World, which sort of explores some of these sort of things. But before we kind of get into it, I just wanted to ask you about, can you tell us a bit about it and how it came about and what are some of the main headlines coming out of kind of the research?
I'd be happy to. So in February this year, we collaborated with Future Workplace to launch this survey by asking questions really designed to reveal the biggest challenges that sales and customer service professionals are facing today. So we sought to identify how L&D could build capabilities and contribute to the success of their teams. And the basics is that, there were US-based respondents, about 300 on the L&D side, and then another 300 sales and customer service leaders. And really the top line, I would say, and, is kind of reinforcing, if not really settling the debate on the importance of emotional intelligence and empathy. If you say, hey, emotional intelligence and empathy are important, it's kind of like, well, no, duh. That's a little obvious.
Right? Wake up.
So, yeah. So you would think. So it's really reinforcing. And by the stats that we saw, really settling the debate. It's not even a question how important it is in business today.
Perfect. I mean, because the thing is, obviously we want people to kind of point people to the report and they go check it out for their own sort of consumption. But what I wanted to do to give people a bit of a flavor of some of the stuff in it, I wanted to sort of explore some of the highlights that stood out for me.
Sure.
And the first one was this quote that says, being able to empathize with customers was the single biggest factor in differentiating their customer service. In fact, twice as many respondents chose empathy over being able to learn new technologies or knowing the competitive landscape. And I was like, wow, that's fascinating. But it did make me think that this idea about, empathy and emotional intelligence in service and experience and how the pandemic has very much brought that to the fore, right? And what I wanted to ask was that, is this just a moment in time, or is this a factor that you think is going to stick around as the effects of the pandemic recede?
I think that it's a little of both, in that we were heading in this direction of really seeing the light in terms of the importance of emotional intelligence in this arena. And it's juxtaposed with if you are, in a team, you're passing the baton, so to speak. And a lot of customer service folks in particular, and also sales professionals, there's an increase of automation and the use of smart bots and everything. So the handoff is actually happening from bot to human.
Right.
And so I think that's that juxtaposition of when you think about the flow of work, people are being handed off from bots. And if it gets escalated, if the bot cannot handle, maybe a more complicated situation, then they're handed off to a human. And I think just even by that simple handoff, it's highlighting what those differences are.
Right.
And I think it's right to assume that people and organizations are already, checking off the box that they're going to hire as, the profile of person that they want is someone who is cognitively intelligent, but maybe they need some reinforcement on the emotional intelligence side.
Right.
And in terms of, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, I'm just going to jump in. Keep going.
No, I was going to say that, not to be flip or to minimize the severity of the consequences of the pandemic. I mean, the death toll is the only reminder we need.
Sure.
But, I think to a degree, there is somewhat of a pandemic hangover. If not a hangover, and people are feeling a little bit out of sorts, they don't feel like themselves, they're a bit grumpy and, not that the hangover was from some fun event or anything. It was a terrible, kind of shared experience. But maybe it's more like jet lag, the time that we have spent away from what we have been accustomed to as normal. Maybe it'll take about that long to then go back to normal.
Okay.
So maybe, I should probably stay away from the prediction of business, but maybe it'll take us that
We're not done with this thing yet, I don't think.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe as long as we were in this kind of limbo, that's how long it'll take for us to then say, okay, are we now looking at a more standard or usual experience again?
Yeah. Thank you for that. And so the next thing I wanted to pick up on was there was another thing in there. There was a stat in the report which says 71% of people that you surveyed said emotional intelligence is becoming more important than cognitive intelligence for customer service jobs. And I was a bit like, oh, another one. Fascinating finding. And it made me think, and I wanted to ask you, does that maybe imply that respondents are starting to see tech as getting better and better and doing more of the heavy lifting? Or is that the emotional intelligence is rising in importance from a strategic perspective in the last 16 months have just gone and shone a big spotlight on it?
Yeah, I think it is in part explained by that the rise of artificial intelligence, and also shining a light on showing that artificial empathy that you actually can't replicate it. And so it's actually not just shining the light on the need for emotional intelligence, but bringing the human back into the loop.
Right.
That the AI today can go only so far. And, and so it's a bit like, is there like a continuum or a spectrum of sorts where, it's heavy bot and then the other end of it is like fully bot to fully human. Yeah. And what is the sort of in between that we are currently negotiating as consumers and as, customer service folks?
Yeah, no, it seems to me that kind of people need to kind of like become a bit more considered and a bit more deliberate about how they approach some of this and that spectrum, and where on that spectrum they kind of will oscillate, as it were, relative to their business and their proposition and their positioning and so on and so forth. But right now, I don't think many people are really considering that or being very deliberate about it. And I think that maybe is the next big challenge for them.
Right. Yeah.
So the other thing, then, the next thing that the highlight is that I wanted to pick out was this, that the idea that says 2/3 of respondents said building trust with customers will be one of the most critical customer service skills over the next 2 years. And I thought, okay, building trust is easy to say and harder to do a lot of the time, and takes a lot of some time and commitment and discipline and all that sort of stuff. So from your research, from your understanding, what would you say is the best way to build trust with customers?
Yeah, it's really tricky because normally we think of trust as something that happens over time.
Mm-hmm.
And customer service folks have, it's almost like they need to trigger instant trust. Like, how do I get this person to trust me? In the meantime, the clock is ticking because how much time I spend with them, is being recorded, the data, the amount of time. And so then the concept of trust that we have maybe assumed or taken for granted that it happens over time, now it needs to happen while customer service folks are having to reduce time on the phone and hold time and everything. And we're asking so much of them. Mm-hmm. And so in the report, we also cite a business professor from the University of South Australia Business School. I may butcher the name, but Ruchi Sinha basically calls out that the fundamentals around building trust. So it's very complex and involves 3 basic elements: competence, integrity, and benevolence. Right. So right away, right there is the package of emotional intelligence and cognitive intelligence.
Right.
It's hard to build trust if you don't display right away that you're competent to handle. Yes. The problem that
particularly
that you're trying to solve.
A service situation when somebody's coming to you seeking help.
Right.
Yeah. And you're sort of
Right.
vulnerable and you're asking for help. And then if you're not presented with competence, then it's like,
right.
You're like down the drain.
Yeah. I mean, I think being totally human in that moment, I think earnestness goes a long way. That you're after the same thing. That you're after, they've come to you in marketing speak. You've kind of led them down the funnel of, that general awareness of your brand, and you got them all the way to actually taking action and purchasing. And now maybe they were really excited about your brand promise of, high quality product, high quality service and everything, but something has broken down in the middle. And that's the only reason why they're calling you is because something has gone wrong. So this product or service that they purchased, they purchased that and secured it because they thought it was going to solve a problem, but now it's generating a new one that leads them to call you. And so I think right away, if you can increase comfort by being just earnest in that you're there to solve the problem. You're after the same thing. And I think is the beginning of building that trust.
Awesome. And then, so I guess building on that, because I mean, you were quoted in the, made famous in the report, as I guess, because you're quoted as saying both EI and IQ are important. The best customer service representatives balance products and systems knowledge with instinctive human-centered capabilities that help them deliver extraordinary service, core to giving customers a positive brand experience. And I was like, 100%. Then it made me think about something that I'd kind of written about around this idea about empathy and the demand for more empathetic interactions, customer interactions, so more empathy in customer interactions. And I've been musing on this for a while now, and I've been thinking about this idea about an empathetic musculature, and that's sort of what kind of organizations need to do, because it's not just about soft skills training. This, right? It's almost you have to take a bit of a holistic approach to be able to deliver against those expectations. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I enjoyed reading your piece on this musculature because essentially it's about habituating, these skills, turning them from either correcting or turning them like from your social instincts to these skills that are well practiced. And the training is a lot like strengthening your muscles. And the approach is really very close to how training would happen in like sports or music. It does take a lot of practice and, isolating skills to drill them until you're on your way to mastery.
Yeah.
And to go back to this.
But I think the important part of that, just to extend the analogy a little bit, is that in sports, you can't just perform just like that. You need equipment and you need diet and nutrition and rest and recovery and kind of like training schedules and facilities and all these different sort of things. So it's a big, complicated picture. It's not just about the human being and it's kind of almost like the way they think and kind of how they kind of behave, but it's also about all the supporting stuff that sits around it, right?
Sure, including diet and nutrition, everything. I think in the brand arena, if you're thinking about it holistically about your brand, really from the very beginning, like we alluded to earlier, the customer's relationship with the brand, as it develops, they're mentally tallying, promises kept, promises broken. Along the way. And to make those decisions on whether or not they will be loyal to your brand and to change, to transform them from just a regular customer to an evangelist for your product. I think if we're remiss in really recognizing that customers are all too ready, guilty as charged here, present company included, that, I think we have kind of a short fuse, and I attribute that to the pandemic mostly, but people are ready to go nuclear. Like they will do the nuclear option of either emailing the CEO or turning to social media to put you on blast because you've broken a bunch of promises.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess the one thing we should also kind of highlight is you talk about the report talks about sales and service kind of people, but actually the requirement extends across organizations, right? It's like it's not just like the onus is on you lot, fine, carry on. Right. We're all right. We don't have to do any work. It's not just that. The requirement is for everybody to up their game. Yeah,
absolutely. Leaders, there are some accidental leaders also among them who may have been, really strong individual contributors and they do their jobs well. And this happens a ton with sales leaders. They're the best salesperson in the organization. And now the organization needs a team leader and they say, oh, you know what you're doing. You're really good at it. Tap that person. And all of a sudden you have a really strong sales contributor, individual contributor, but they may not be prepared to lead a team. And so instead of, kind of letting them, figure out on their own. And there is a mix, certainly. I think the Center for Creative Leadership says that the right mix is somewhere around like 70% is on-the-job training. Another 20% is, some kind of group training. And then some, the other 10% is really kind of very specialized. Right. But I think the missing component is the giving people more opportunities to practice. So you're not just getting them up to speed on what they should be doing, but in a practice situation and on a practice platform like Mergen, you actually get to see what they would do in a particular situation.
Perfect. I mean, and thank you for that kind of like brilliant segue and then the check is in the post. Because that's what I was going to kind of come to next. I was going to go, well, we've talked about the report, but let's talk about immersion, because I know that you're in the thick of this and you combine some of that practice with VR and that whole kind of empathy space amongst all other sort of things. And so I wondered if you could tell me a couple of stories about your platform and, maybe a couple of examples about brands that have leveraged your tech and their approach and what it's allowed them to do differently and how it's benefited them and their customers and their employees and things, just to bring it to life and to see, because I think what you're doing is possibly one of these components. When I talk about this empathetic musculature, it's almost like a bit of it's like a plug-in. It's like, here you go. This is the thing that you that helps you build these muscles, right?
Right.
And that's kind of why it kind of like showed up on my radar. I was like, oh, that looks like a thing. So if you could tell me a couple of stories about brands that have used your platform and what they've done with it and how it's benefited them, that'd be brilliant.
Yeah, and before I forget, I'd like to invite you to experience immersion. It is a lot better experience than explained because it's highly visual, and it is something where a lot of people are skeptical precisely how it would work, but we have very quick converts as soon as they see and feel being in the hot seat.
I am totally up for that. I will kind of like sign me up.
Okay, awesome. So essentially, it is a virtual environment where you can customize 3 basic components. So the environment itself, like right now I'm sitting in front of a virtual background that is, recognizable as an office. It could be a school, a classroom, or it could be an office, or it could be a warehouse, a retail store. One of our customers who customized that particular element was T-Mobile. And so we built a retail store floor for them because that was, everything in service to making the experience for the learner as authentic and believable, and it feels like they could suspend their disbelief. So the first thing is the environment. And then who's on the scene, who's in the environment. And so then you talk about avatars, right? So the avatars are there for someone to interact with and practice these skills. And the avatars can see them also because they're puppeteered by a human, an expert at improv. But they are essentially trained on the third component that you can design, which is the scenario itself. There are boundaries for the scenario. So if a learner goes off on a tangent, the improv who's digitally puppeteering the avatars will say, well, that's really interesting, but let's bring it back to the point. Exactly. And so then that way, while they're not necessarily the subject matter expert, they're there to facilitate the interaction. They have very, well-stated what is the objective and what are some of the suggested strategies. So in the report, we do highlight the work of H&R Block. I don't know if H&R Block is in the UK necessarily, but in the US, they prepare about 23 million tax returns on an annual basis.
Okay.
And so to summarize the engagement with them, so they have some late hires, customer service folks who are late hires based on the tax cycle. And typically the customer service, the late hires, they're more junior, could be their first job, and they need to get them up to speed because they may not necessarily have all the expertise that the folks who are there kind of on a regular basis full time, because these are more seasonal hires. So they did all of those things that I described, which is customizing every single component. Now you might want to ask, what do customer service agents who do work really exclusively over the phone, why do they need a visual cue?
Sure.
Why do they need a simulation where they can see an avatar representing a customer? And that's where empathy comes. And so mixed reality can be a really effective device to be a bridge to being able to imagine and visualize the customer for empathy training. And so the environments that house the avatars were basically, these are your customers who are at home. Taxes are incredibly stressful and personal. Mm-hmm. So you could be dealing with someone who has all of their tax documents all over the table, and they're stressed out, and they're having to disclose really deeply personal matters to you. And so then, shout out to Kim Irons at H&R Block. This was her baby, and this was not her first go around with virtual reality training. But she saw that, this is a way to help, to give a really concrete tool to customer service reps. They don't even have to imagine at the moment because they're being given the visual. But when they are done with the training, that actually continues. It helps them go, this could be this type of customer, really stressed out. And I can tell, I've seen this basically, like they've done it before.
Or maybe they get to the kind of point, perhaps, that they're speaking to somebody on the phone and they're like going, so do you have all the documents out in front of you? And it's all like a big pile.
Right.
And they might like going, yeah, I do. You're like, okay. So
yeah.
And then you get the idea. It's like, and that's probably pretty confusing. So the one I wanted you to look for is I want you to look for this one.
Right.
And then because you've got that picture in your mind, you can imagine the scene and you can help them navigate sort of thing. And that's the key. Then you're like there, right?
Right. Yeah. So I see it like, we've heard this term before, like something was really basically like a failure of imagination, that you didn't anticipate something and everything just went completely sideways and pear-shaped. So you're like, okay, if you can have a tool that can bridge and go into that realm of imagining and visualizing, then I think it makes it that much more real, and you can't help but be empathetic. The business impact of that particular project was that H&R Block saved about 131%, equivalent to 131% of what they spent on immersion, right? By helping cut down by 4,119 hours, reducing both hold times and talk times. Wow. Of their customer service, while not compromising on the quality of their interaction.
So you just basically got people up to speed kind of very quickly and didn't compromise on any of the quality, but improved on that sort of that empathy and the sort of the imagineering, as it were.
Yes, definitely.
Sort of and so tell me more. Did you do like a similar sort of thing with the T-Mobile one that you mentioned, or do you have another example that's kind of like similar but different that you could tell us about?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now, if you simply searched on like customers behaving badly, you'll be startled at the number of articles that'll pop up. And now that we're slowly, but maybe retreating back again, not sure, out of lockdown, I think a lot of the customer interactions where we might see tension are places that we used to frequent, but now they've become there's a potential for something highly charged to happen. And while we haven't dug deeply into the case study, but if you go to the Starbucks website, they have made public a civil rights assessment and an evaluation of their scorecard, basically, on civil rights initiatives. And in that, they mentioned immersion twice. They mentioned the work that we're doing with them in helping their managers really build up that muscle for how to de-escalate situations and conversations.
Right.
And it sounds really, it is as stressful as it sounds. I feel like, we do ask a lot of customer service and sales frontline workers, and you have to be part improv master yourself and go a bit off script to help take care of a customer, or maybe part hostage negotiator to de-escalate a situation so that they don't go nuclear, and get them to put the pin back in the grenade.
Well,
Yeah.
And I guess you've got to kind of also kind of balance the idea of it's helpful to create a space where people can make mistakes.
Right.
Because people, in many kind of situations, some people don't do something for fear of making a mistake.
Right.
Right. And they're like, I don't want to misstep. I don't want to do that. I don't want to say something that's out of turn. I don't know how to handle this sort of thing. And therefore they just go silent.
Yeah. Right.
And that's almost like the worst thing that you can do. It's almost a bit like ignoring, not hearing somebody, right? But that fear is real. Some people are just they don't like that. I mean, and they don't want to do that. It's like what they say is said that I think a fear of spiders is at the top. Whereas social phobia is kind of like number 2 on our greatest fears. And that sort of covers everything. The kind of the idea of being socially, outcast, or saying the wrong thing, or looking stupid, or kind of failing in public, all these different sort of things. And so there's this big and real thing. So actually creating a space where somebody can go, it's a safe space. It's VR. It's you can try, have the best intentions and try. You can make mistakes. Kind of here.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, we hear that all the time, like the psychologically safe space. Learners who use the immersion technology can say, you know what, I need to pause. Like, I just completely blew that. Can we start over? Or say, consult with the host avatar who will guide you through the scenario and also help you reflect on your session. Is that and say, actually, I just want to pick up where I left off. Let me see if I can recover from that initial misstep, which is nearly impossible, if not really pretty much impossible how do you create a training space for that? Role play can only go so much, go far as so far, and especially like in this virtual environment that we're in. And also, like, if you're doing role play and you're opposite someone who just all of a sudden gets the fit of giggles and they're robbing you of a learning opportunity, or you want to maybe go easy on them because maybe you're opposite your manager, in whatever there may be. And so there isn't that psychological safety. And, I really find fascinating some of the work at Stanford by Jeremy Bailenson, who helped start another VR company that's based on sports training, but he's also an advisor for immersion. And he has this hero study that he did. And really the nut of it is that the conclusion was that when they gave people superpowers in an immersive simulated environment, it carries over into the real world. Right. So when they have superpowers in the virtual environment, they do altruistic things in the real world. So I think it's super powerful.
Absolutely. And again, it's just that giving people the capacity to build that muscle in a way that's it's not going to come and bite them on the arse. So thank you for that. I mean, is there anything that we've missed out that you'd like to add about the kind of the merchant platform or the kind of study that we haven't kind of covered off before I ask you just some kind of broader sort of general kind of questions?
No, I think we well covered it. There is some insights on the sales. So there's another customer story in there, an anonymized story, but it's about right skilling your sales professionals, that before you can even decide on what training they need. You need to see like where do they belong. And these were sales folks who were selling really high ticket items to into the C-suite. And so they needed an assessment of sorts by designing scenarios that will help determine, what further training that they need. So it can also be an assessment tool.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So just opening up a little bit. I mean, I know because you're doing some cool stuff in this sort of space and thinking about service and experience and empathy and emotional intelligence and stuff. I mean, from your perspective, what does the future of service and experience look like, and kind of what are some of the big challenges ahead that you think we're going to need to, I don't know, go around or over, under, whatever, navigate, in order to be successful?
Well, I think that we will actually see the tension between the use of bots and what people want in terms of human interaction. That'll come to a head. I think it was very pronounced during the pandemic, because I think when we're locked down, it's like we want human interaction. And I was speaking with someone on a customer experience team for a public company, and they review all the text. And I mean, most people just say bot. They type bot over and over again to try to break it so that they can get to a human. Or when you're like in this loop of, kind of voice prompts, if you're over the phone calling customer service, you may blurt out agent or operator or something to trigger the system to get you to a customer service, a human, as quickly as possible.
Sure.
So, I think being intellectually honest about the role of bots is something that we need to wrestle with, because it is a feature, not a bug, to slow things down. So you have this like slowing people down to do things like detect fraud, or just to even exhaust a customer, to be honest. It's like maybe they'll give up and we don't have to, really redress or refund or what have you.
Yeah.
And so let's be intellectually honest about the role of bots, for one.
Okay.
And then say, okay, we need to shore up when they get to a human. The humans have to then wrestle with, I'm going to do everything I can to differentiate myself from the bot, because now they're with a human, but sometimes they're so limited and bounded by the script that they sound like robots, to be honest. It's like, no, are you really listening? Like, am I talking to a human or am I still talking to a bot? Because I cannot tell the difference. So I think that's going to come to a head, that where is that balance? Because bots do have a function and they are here to stay. So it really begs the question. And when we're automating more and asking technology to do a lot of the heavy lifting, it'll put a major spotlight on the human part of the interaction. And you have to make those moments that now you're tasked with, keep the call short and get them off the phone as quickly as possible. Well, now you have an opportunity, you have a shrinking opportunity to show that you're a human being and that you can empathize.
Well, I think that's absolutely kind of true. You think about the trajectory that we're on, where people are saying we want technology to try and tackle as many of the mundane, simple, and repetitive tasks as possible, and they can do that with speed and efficiency and so on and so forth. And we want to sort of make sure that when people interact with a person, that it's likely to be on more complex and more challenging sort of tasks. But if you're taking if you get the reference, an Adam Smith pin factory sort of approach to something that everybody's specialized to within an inch of their life and scripted to hell, then that sort of control doesn't fit with complexity and challenge and complex problems. And so it feels like there's going to need to be, as you kind of saying, is like a re-engineering of kind of what it means to be a service agent when technology does that heavy lifting.
Right. Yeah. And that baton passing that, you're really like you're the next in line to interact with this human. And right before you, they were interacting with a bot. So it's your moment to shine, to be honest,
Yeah. And here's the thing is like, interestingly enough, I don't think that customers necessarily blame the agents because they know when
right.
the agents are constrained, as it were, and so it's the brand that gets the washback,
exactly.
not the person. The frustration might be taken out on the person, but it actually is more about the brand than anything else.
Yeah, that's spot on.
So we boiled it all down, Monica. We said if you had to say to somebody, right, you want to improve your servicing experience, here's 2 things that you should do. What would you say that they should do?
Well, they should do 3 things: practice, practice, practice.
There you go.
It's 3 things in one, the trinity of practice, practice, practice. And I think it's because it's what really addresses how something could go wrong is when a human being goes into fight or flight mode. But if they practice a conversation and they're much more confident and competent, I think you set them up right. So practice the conversations. I think we take that for granted. Oh, I've got this, I know how to be, I've got my scripts and everything. But if you invariably someone will come along and sort of blow up your script. Yeah.
And if you're not kind of prepared for that, then it's like, you feel like you're all at sea, and it's more likely to make a mess of it than actually can help, I guess. Yeah.
And if I had to give one other thing is hire an anthropologist to surface the blind spots.
There you go.
To not take for granted the things that you can, make the familiar strange and the strange familiar, and not a way to shed your assumptions and uncover blind spots, because you may be tackling the wrong problem,
I
otherwise.
Think, I think that's kind of that's absolutely fair. I would say that I think anthropology is a great craft. It's inherently it's systemic in its thinking and its approach to things, because it starts with observation. It doesn't start with theories as such.
Right.
It's just about noticing things and noticing how things can work. And I think that too often these days that we end up with, we end up almost like having a template and then kind of going around and trying to make it fit, right? Rather than just kind of going, let me understand what's going on here.
Right. Absolutely. Yes.
So before we go, as I explained before we got started, I published this book called Punk CX summer of 2019. And ever since then, I've been asking every interviewee sort of a couple of, I'm calling it quite fancily, sort of longitudinal social research. But it's literally kind of 2-word association, kind of like questions. And the first one is, what 1 or maybe 2 words do you think would you use to describe a more punk approach to customer experience?
Avatars.
Oh, avatars. I know that's definitely not on the list. So that's definitely going on the list.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Avatars have a disruptive element about them. And kind of counterintuitive that you're going to practice with a computer-generated human to bring out your own humanity. So in that way, it's very punk, right?
Yeah.
To me, every single immersion customer and client who use VR to help for, enhancing people's skills, it's very punk rock. It's so punk rock.
Nice.
For another day, but I got, like you said, got married using virtual reality technology, and so I'm all in. But avatar, I got married as an avatar. People keep asking me, "Are you sure you married the right avatar, though?"
And you got swapped out, going to behind the scenes.
Yes, we're still married, so that's my secret to success is marrying an avatar. And I think it's in the same way as punk. It really not just had that disruptive element to it, but also recognized and saw maybe people who felt not represented or marginalized.
Sure.
And it sought to be a voice to understand them. Mm-hmm. And so I think practicing your humanity by, talking to an avatar is a really rich opportunity, in a psychologically safe space.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I love that word. That's great. And the second one is company or brand that you think epitomizes that sort of approach or that sort of punk ethos in the experience space?
Yeah. So I don't know if you've heard of them. Not an immersion customer. I just interacted with some of their folks over the weekend. A grocer called Trader Joe's.
Okay.
That was established out here in California. And their aesthetic, like in their physical space, it's very kind of surfer vibe. Mm-hmm. And they have a cult following. They're not perfect by any stretch, but they do have a cult following. And they make you feel seen and sort of understood when you're wandering around. I mean, I overheard a customer, interacting with one of the associates at Trader Joe's who's looking for a recommendation on a product. Mm-hmm. And he said simply, well, I would try this one, and pull the product off the shelf and said, but if it sucks, bring it back. Just very like that's just who they are.
Yeah.
And it's like, they know they can only control the product so much. And they were being very honest. Like, if it doesn't meet your expectations, we won't judge you.
Yeah, absolutely.
If it sucks, bring it back.
Nice. Thank you for that. What a great example. So Monica, that's all I have for today. I just want to say congratulations on the work that you're doing at Mercian. I think it's fascinating. I think it's really exciting. It's really interesting. It's really, the way that you can plug it in and help people build that capacity in a, as you say, psychologically safe sort of space is great. I would say people should definitely kind of check out the report, The Human Edge in an AI kind of world by Mercian and Future Workplace. And finally, just want to say thank you for sharing your time and your insights with us today. That's been awesome.
My pleasure. And I'll be back in touch to set up a session for you.
Woohoo! Looking forward to it.
Your turn with the avatars.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.